Sarah Jenkins walked through the busy halls of Atlanta Regional Hospital, her comfortable nursing shoes making soft squeaking sounds against the polished floor. At 32 years old, she had established herself as one of the most respected physical therapists in the facility. Her colleagues often praised her for her patience and dedication, but what truly set her apart was her ability to see the person behind the injury. On this particular Monday morning, Sarah was reviewing her new patient files while sipping her morning coffee. Her coworker, Linda, rushed up to her desk with an urgent look on her face. "Sarah, we have a new patient in room 205. He's having a difficult time accepting his situation." Sarah nodded understandingly. She had seen many patients struggle with their new realities. Gathering her materials and taking a final sip of coffee, she made her way to room 205. As she approached the door, she could hear raised voices from inside. "I don't need anyone's help," a male voice shouted. "Just leave me alone." Taking a deep breath, Sarah knocked on the door and entered. The scene before her was all too familiar, a patient struggling against the nursing staff's attempts to help him sit properly in his wheelchair. But something about this particular patient made her pause. Marcus Thompson sat in his wheelchair, his athletic frame tense with frustration. At 35, he had been a successful high school basketball coach until a drunk driver changed his life 3 months ago. The accident had left him paralyzed from the waist down, and the adjustment wasn't going well. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said calmly, her warm brown eyes meeting his angry ones. "I'm Sarah Jenkins, and I'll be your physical therapist." Marcus looked at her, ready to snap another angry response, but something in her steady gaze made him hesitate. Unlike the pitying looks he received from others, her eyes held only professional warmth and quiet confidence. "I don't mean to be rude," he said, his voice softer but still strained, "but I don't think this is going to work." Sarah pulled up a chair and sat down, placing herself at eye level with him. "Why don't you tell me why you think that?" she asked, pulling out her notepad. Over the next hour, Marcus found himself opening up about his fears and frustrations. He spoke about his love for basketball, how he used to run drills with his students, and how he couldn't imagine living a life confined to a wheelchair. Sarah listened attentively, occasionally making notes, but mostly just letting him talk. "Mr. Thompson," she said when he finished, "I'm not going to promise you miracles, but I will promise you this: if you're willing to work with me, I'll help you build a new normal. One where you can still coach, still inspire others, and still live a full life." Marcus studied her face for any sign of insincerity but found none. For the first time since his accident, he felt a tiny spark of hope. "You really believe that's possible?" Sarah smiled, remembering other patients who had gone on to live remarkable lives despite their disabilities. "I don't just believe it, Mr. Thompson. I've seen it happen." As she began explaining the rehabilitation program she had in mind, Sarah noticed small changes in Marcus's demeanor. His shoulders relaxed slightly, and the anger in his eyes was replaced by cautious interest. She demonstrated some simple exercises they would start with, and to her surprise, he attempted them without protest. By the end of their first session, Marcus had agreed to commit to the program. As Sarah packed up her materials, she felt oddly excited about working with this particular patient. There was something about his determination, hidden beneath layers of anger and fear, that intrigued her. What Sarah didn't know as she left room 205 that day was that this meeting would change both their lives forever. She had no idea that the man sitting in that wheelchair, struggling with his new reality, would one day become her husband and give her the surprise of a lifetime. As she walked back to her office, Sarah thought about the challenge ahead. Working with Marcus wouldn't be easy. His stubbornness was evident, and his emotional wounds were still fresh. But something told her that this case would be different. She just didn't know how different it would turn out to be. Over the next 3 months, Sarah and Marcus fell into a steady routine at Atlanta Regional Hospital. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 10 a.m., Sarah would arrive at the rehabilitation room to find Marcus already there, ready to work. Despite his initial resistance, he was proving to be one of her most dedicated patients. "Come on, just 5 more minutes," Sarah encouraged one morning, watching Marcus struggle with his upper body strengthening exercises. Sweat dripped down his face, but his determination never wavered. "You know," he said between breaths, "you're not as soft as you look, Miss Jenkins. You're actually quite the taskmaster." His words were challenging, but his eyes held a playful spark that was becoming more frequent these days. Sarah laughed, a sound that Marcus had grown to appreciate more than he cared to admit. "That's why I'm the best at what I do, Mr. Thompson. Now, 4 more minutes to go." The changes in Marcus were subtle at first. His angry outbursts became less frequent, replaced by a dry sense of humor that often had Sarah hiding her smiles behind her clipboard. He started sharing stories about his basketball team, his eyes lighting up when he talked about his former students. But not everyone saw the progress Sarah saw. One afternoon, she overheard two nurses talking in the break room. "Did you see that new patient Sarah's working with?" One whispered. "Such a shame. He used to be so active, and now, well, I don't know why she spends so much extra time with him. Some people just can't be helped." Sarah felt her face grow hot with anger. She wanted to defend Marcus, to tell them about how he had started mentoring young patients in the pediatric ward, teaching them basketball techniques they could practice from their wheelchairs. Instead, she quietly left the room, more determined than ever to help him succeed. Marcus faced his own battles outside of therapy. His best friend, David, visited one day after a session. Sarah overheard their conversation as she passed by the room. "Man, you've got to stop this," David said. "I see how you look at her. She's your therapist, and besides, you know it wouldn't work. You need to be realistic about your situation." "You don't think I know that?" Marcus replied, his voice tight with emotion. "You don't think I remember what I am every single morning when I wake up? But Sarah, she sees me. Not the wheelchair, just me." Sarah quickly walked away, her heart beating faster. She hadn't realized Marcus had feelings for her, or perhaps she had been denying her own growing feelings for him. It was unprofessional, she knew that. But every time he smiled or made one of his dry jokes, she felt something shift inside her. The turning point came during a difficult therapy session. Marcus was trying to master a new transfer technique, but kept failing. His frustration mounted with each attempt. "I can't do this," he finally exploded, pounding his fist on his wheelchair armrest. "This is useless. I'm useless." Without thinking, Sarah knelt in front of him and grabbed his hands. "Look at me, Marcus," she said firmly, using his first name for the first time. "You are not useless. You are one of the strongest, most inspiring people I've ever met. And I won't let you give up on yourself." The room fell silent. They both realized something had changed. The professional boundary between therapist and patient had blurred into something else, something neither of them had expected. Later that week, Sarah requested to transfer Marcus's care to another therapist. It was the proper thing to do, she told herself, even as her heart protested. But when she told Marcus, his response surprised her. "Have dinner with me," he said suddenly. "Not as your patient, just as a man asking a woman he admires to have dinner with him." Sarah knew she should say no. Her colleagues would gossip, people would judge, and the road ahead would be challenging. But looking into Marcus's eyes, she saw the same thing he saw in her. Someone who looked past the surface to see the person underneath. "Yes," she said simply, and watched as the biggest smile she'd ever seen spread across his face. Neither of them knew it then, but that simple yes was the beginning of a love story that would prove stronger than any barrier life could put in their way. Their first date was at a small Italian restaurant near the hospital. Sarah arrived to find Marcus already waiting at a table, wearing a crisp blue shirt that brought out his eyes. He had gotten there early, nervous about managing the restaurant entrance in his wheelchair without making a scene. "You look beautiful," he said as she sat down, admiring her simple red dress. Sarah blushed, noticing how different Marcus looked outside the hospital setting. More confident, more himself. The evening flowed naturally, filled with conversation and laughter. Marcus told her about his childhood dreams of playing professional basketball and how coaching became his true calling instead. Sarah shared stories about her family in Georgia and how her grandmother's struggle with arthritis had inspired her to become a physical therapist. But reality had a way of creeping in. As they ate their pasta, they could feel the stares from other diners. Some looked with pity, others with curiosity, wondering what brought this unlikely pair together. "Does it bother you?" Marcus asked quietly, nodding toward the onlookers. "Being seen with me like this?" Sarah put down her fork and looked straight into his eyes. "The only thing that bothers me," she said firmly, "is that you might think I care what anyone else thinks." That night marked the beginning of their journey together. Over the next 6 months, they faced challenges that tested their growing love. Sarah's best friend, Melissa, confronted her one afternoon during their weekly coffee meetup. "Sarah, honey, I need to ask you something," Melissa said hesitantly. "Are you sure about this relationship? I mean, really sure. Taking care of him will be your whole life." Sarah stirred her coffee slowly, choosing her words carefully. "Marcus doesn't need someone to take care of him, Melissa. He needs someone to love him. And I do. I love him for his strength, his humor, his heart. The wheelchair? That's just part of our story, not the whole story." Meanwhile, Marcus battled his own demons. Late one night, after a particularly wonderful date, he sat in his apartment staring at his reflection in the window. The thought of proposing to Sarah had been consuming his mind, but doubt crept in like a shadow. The next day, he wheeled himself to visit his mother, Rose, who had always been his strongest supporter. "Mama," he said, pulling out a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "I want to ask Sarah to marry me, but am I being selfish? She deserves someone who can dance with her at their wedding, who can carry her across the threshold." Rose took her son's face in her hands, just as she used to do when he was a little boy with scraped knees. "My son, that woman looks at you the way I looked at your father. Like you're her whole world. Don't let fear steal your happiness." 2 weeks later, during a family barbecue at Rose's house, Marcus gathered his courage. He had arranged everything carefully, making sure the moment would be perfect. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the backyard, he asked Sarah to join him near the old oak tree. "Sarah," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "before you, I thought my life was over. I was angry at the world, at God, at everything. But you showed me that life doesn't end when things get hard. It just takes a different path." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out the small velvet box. Their families gathered around, holding their breath. "I can't get down on one knee," Marcus said with a small smile, "but I can promise you this. I will spend every day of my life loving you, supporting your dreams, and thanking God for bringing you into my life. Sarah Jenkins, will you marry me?" The tears were flowing freely now as Sarah looked at the simple but beautiful diamond ring. In that moment, she saw their future, all the challenges, all the joy, all the love that lay ahead. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "yes." The backyard erupted in cheers as Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger. What nobody knew then was that Marcus was already planning something extraordinary for their wedding day, a surprise that would leave everyone, especially Sarah, absolutely speechless. The 6 months leading up to the wedding were filled with both excitement and secret preparations. While Sarah immersed herself in wedding planning, Marcus was quietly working on something that would change their lives forever. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, Marcus told Sarah he had regular checkups at the hospital. In reality, he was participating in an experimental treatment program led by Dr. James Chen, a specialist in spinal cord injuries. The treatment combined innovative therapy techniques with new medical procedures that showed promise for partial mobility recovery. "The progress is remarkable, Marcus," Dr. Chen said during one session, watching as Marcus managed to move his toes slightly. "But remember, we can't guarantee you'll be able to stand by the wedding day. Are you sure you want to keep this from Sarah?" Marcus gripped the parallel bars tightly, sweat dripping down his face from the effort. "I have to try, Doc. I want to give her something no one expects. Something to show her that her faith in me wasn't misplaced." Only Marcus's mother, Rose, knew about these secret sessions. She would drive him to the hospital's private rehabilitation wing, helping him maintain the story of routine checkups. Sometimes, when the pain was particularly bad after therapy, she would hold his hand just like she did when he was a child. "You don't need to prove anything to Sarah," Rose told him one day. "She loves you just as you are." Marcus smiled, still catching his breath from the morning's exercises. "I know, Mama. This isn't about proving something. It's about showing her that miracles can happen when you don't give up." Meanwhile, Sarah was busy turning their dream wedding into reality. She had chosen a beautiful church with wheelchair-accessible features, making sure everything would be comfortable for Marcus. Her friend Linda helped her pick out a gorgeous ivory wedding dress, and together they planned how Sarah would wheel down the aisle alongside Marcus. "I've never seen you so happy," Linda remarked one day during a cake tasting. "You're practically glowing." Sarah sampled a piece of vanilla cake and smiled. I am happy. You know, it's funny. Everyone focused on what would be difficult about loving someone in a wheelchair, but they never understood that loving Marcus is the easiest thing I've ever done. The couple attended their wedding preparation classes at the church, where they met with Pastor Michael for counseling. During one session, he asked them about their biggest fears for the marriage. Sometimes, Sarah admitted, holding Marcus's hand, I worry that people will never see us as just a normal couple, that they'll always stare and whisper. Marcus squeezed her hand. And I worry that I won't be able to give Sarah everything she deserves in life. He didn't mention his secret therapy sessions, but the thought of them gave him strength. Pastor Michael smiled warmly at them. Love isn't about what others see or about physical abilities. It's about two hearts choosing each other every day, through all of life's challenges. As the wedding day drew closer, Marcus increased his therapy sessions, pushing himself harder than ever. There were days when the pain was almost unbearable, but the thought of surprising Sarah kept him going. Dr. Chen worried about his determination sometimes, but couldn't deny the incredible progress. 2 weeks before the wedding, during a secret session, Marcus achieved something remarkable. He managed to stand for nearly 30 seconds while holding the parallel bars. Dr. Chen and his team were amazed, but Marcus wasn't satisfied. I need to do better, he insisted. I need to be able to take actual steps by the wedding day. Rose, who was watching from the corner, wiped tears from her eyes. My boy, you've already done the impossible. Sarah will be so proud. What none of them knew was that Sarah had been having some suspicions about Marcus's frequent hospital visits. But rather than question him, she trusted that whatever was happening, he would share it with her when he was ready. Her focus remained on making their wedding day perfect, unaware that it would become even more perfect than she could imagine. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself was celebrating Sarah and Marcus's special day. The historic Peachtree Church looked magnificent, decorated with white roses and soft ivory ribbons that swayed gently in the spring breeze. In the bridal suite, Sarah sat before a large mirror as her mother helped her with the final touches of her makeup. Her ivory dress, carefully chosen to look beautiful whether she was standing or sitting next to Marcus's wheelchair, flowed around her like a cloud. You look like an angel, her mother whispered, carefully adjusting Sarah's veil. I've never seen a more beautiful bride. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she touched the pearl necklace Marcus had given her as an early wedding gift. I keep thinking about how blessed I am, Mom. Everyone said our love would be too difficult, too complicated. But loving Marcus has been the easiest thing I've ever done. Meanwhile, in the groom's room, Marcus was getting ready with help from his best friend David and his father. He wore a handsome black tuxedo, specially tailored to look perfect while seated. His mother Rose watched from the doorway, trying to hold back tears as she thought about the surprise that would come later. How are you feeling, son? His father asked, adjusting Marcus's bow tie. Marcus took a deep breath, thinking about both the ceremony and his secret plan. Nervous, excited, blessed, everything at once. I just want to make Sarah proud. The church filled quickly with friends and family. Some guests whispered among themselves, wondering how the ceremony would work with Marcus in his wheelchair. But as the music began to play, all whispers faded into reverent silence. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle first, each carrying a bouquet of white roses. Then Marcus wheeled himself to the altar, looking handsome and dignified in his tuxedo. His eyes were fixed on the church doors, waiting for his first glimpse of his bride. When the wedding march began to play, the doors opened to reveal Sarah. She had chosen to walk beside an empty wheelchair, decorated with flowers and ribbons, symbolizing her journey to join Marcus at the altar. Her father walked on her other side, proud tears streaming down his face. As she moved down the aisle, Sarah's eyes never left Marcus's. She saw in his face the same love, respect, and devotion that had brought them to this moment. The guests watched in emotional silence as she made her way forward, many wiping away tears at the beautiful symbolism of her entrance. Pastor Michael smiled warmly as Sarah reached the altar. Who gives this woman to be married? He asked. Her mother and I do, Sarah's father replied, his voice thick with emotion. He kissed her cheek before taking his seat. The ceremony was deeply moving. Pastor Michael spoke about love that transcends physical limitations, about seeing with the heart rather than the eyes. When it came time for the vows, Marcus went first. Sarah, he began, his voice strong and clear, You saw me when I couldn't even see myself. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. I promise to spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of the gift of your love. Whether sitting or standing, in sickness or in health, I will always be by your side." Sarah wiped away tears as she spoke her vows. "Marcus, you taught me what true strength looks like. Your love has made me a better person. I promise to be your partner in all things, to face every challenge by your side, and to thank God every day for bringing you into my life." The exchange of rings was beautiful in its simplicity. Marcus's hands were steady as he slipped the gold band onto Sarah's finger. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she did the same for him, overcome with emotion. "By the power vested in me," Pastor Michael proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Their first kiss as a married couple was sweet and tender, accompanied by applause and cheers from their guests. But as they prepared to head to the reception, only a few people knew that the biggest moment of the day was yet to come. The atmosphere was electric with joy as the wedding party made their way to the reception hall. Located in the same building as the church, the hall's large wooden doors remained closed, waiting for the newlyweds' grand entrance. Guests hurried ahead through a side entrance, eager to be in place for the couple's arrival. Sarah couldn't stop smiling as she and Marcus moved down the hallway together. She noticed that Marcus seemed unusually quiet, but she assumed he was just taking in all the emotions of the day. His hand trembled slightly when she reached over to hold it. "Are you okay, honey?" she asked softly, squeezing his hand. Marcus looked up at her, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite read. "I've never been better," he replied. "Sarah, before we go in, there's something I need to tell you." They stopped in front of the large wooden doors. Through them, they could hear the muffled sounds of their guests chattering excitedly. The wedding coordinator had gone ahead to prepare their introduction, leaving them alone in the quiet hallway. "What is it?" Sarah asked, noticing how Marcus's hands gripped his wheelchair's armrests tightly. "For the past 6 months," Marcus began, his voice slightly shaky, "I've been keeping a secret from you. Those hospital checkups weren't just checkups." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected something was different about those appointments, but had trusted Marcus to tell her when he was ready. "I've been working with Dr. Chen on an experimental treatment program," he continued. "The success rate was low, and I didn't want to get your hopes up. But I wanted so badly to give you something special today." Before Sarah could respond, Marcus looked toward the doors. "David?" he called out. The door opened slightly, and David slipped through with something in his hands. Sarah gasped when she saw what it was. A walker, decorated with the same white roses and ribbons that matched their wedding theme. "Marcus," she whispered, her hand covering her mouth. "What are you?" "Step back a little, my love," Marcus said gently. The confidence in his voice was new, something she hadn't heard before. Sarah moved back, her heart pounding. The world seemed to slow down as she watched Marcus take a deep breath. His hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair tightly, his arms flexing with effort. And then, slowly but surely, Marcus began to push himself up. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she watched her husband, her strong, determined, incredible husband, rise from his wheelchair. David quickly moved forward with the walker, positioning it perfectly as Marcus gripped it for support. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God, Marcus." Marcus stood before her, trembling slightly with effort but standing nonetheless. At his full height, he was several inches taller than Sarah, something she had never experienced before. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but his eyes shone with triumph and love. "I wanted to enter our reception standing tall beside my wife," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The doctors say I'll still need my wheelchair most of the time. But with therapy and this walker, I can stand. I can take a few steps. And right now, I want to walk through those doors with you." Sarah couldn't speak through her tears. She moved forward and carefully wrapped her arms around Marcus, feeling him steady and strong against her. For a moment, they just held each other, their hearts beating in perfect sync. David quietly moved to open the reception doors, giving them their moment. Through the opening, they could see their guests rising from their seats, cameras ready for the couple's entrance. "Are you ready, Mrs. Thompson?" Marcus asked softly, adjusting his grip on the walker. Sarah wiped her tears, though they were quickly replaced by new ones. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life, Mr. Thompson." Together, They faced the doors. What waited on the other side was more than just their reception. It was the beginning of their new life together, one where they had proved that love truly could conquer all obstacles. The double doors to the reception hall swung open fully, and a hush fell over the crowd. The wedding coordinator, who had been about to announce the couple's entrance, stood speechless, her microphone forgotten in her hand. 200 pairs of eyes widened in astonishment at the sight before them. There stood Marcus Thompson, supported by his decorated walker, standing tall beside his bride. The silence lasted only a moment before the room erupted in gasps, cheers, and emotional cries. Sarah's mother collapsed into her husband's arms, sobbing with joy. Marcus's father stood frozen, tears streaming down his usually stoic face. "Ladies and gentlemen," David announced, having taken the microphone from the stunned coordinator, "it is my honor to present to you, for the first time standing together, Mr. and Mrs. Marcus Thompson." The applause was deafening. Slowly, carefully, Marcus took his first step forward with Sarah by his side. Each small movement was a triumph, each step a testimony to months of secret struggle and determination. Sarah matched his pace perfectly, one hand hovering near his back, not to support him, but to connect with him in this miraculous moment. "He's walking," someone shouted from the crowd. "It's a miracle." Marcus's mother Rose made her way to the front of the crowd. For 6 months, she announced through happy tears, "My son has been part of an experimental treatment program. He worked so hard, pushing through pain and exhaustion, all to surprise his bride on their wedding day." Dr. Chen, who had been invited to the wedding as a guest, stood up from his table. "Marcus has been one of our most determined patients," he explained to the amazed crowd. "While we can't promise permanent walking ability, through this new therapy, he has regained some mobility. His progress has been remarkable." Sarah turned to face her husband, her eyes shining with love and pride. "You did all this in secret? All those appointments?" Marcus nodded, taking another careful step. "Every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 a.m. Some days were so hard I wanted to give up. But then I'd think of this moment, of standing beside you at our reception, and it gave me the strength to continue." They made their way to the center of the dance floor, where a specially reinforced walker waited, decorated with flowers to match the wedding theme. The DJ began to play their chosen song, "At Last" by Etta James. What happened next took everyone's breath away. Marcus slowly moved his hands from the walker to Sarah's waist. With Sarah's arms around his neck for balance, they began to sway gently to the music. It wasn't the kind of dance they'd originally imagined years ago, but it was perfect in its own way. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. "I can't believe you did this for me," Sarah whispered as they moved together. Marcus smiled, his eyes never leaving hers. "I did it for us. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. This is my way of showing you that with you by my side, nothing is impossible." Throughout the reception, Marcus alternated between his wheelchair and standing with the walker, careful not to overexert himself. Each time he stood, guests watched in amazement. Children asked their parents if they had witnessed a miracle, and in many ways they had. Dr. Chen spoke with curious guests about the treatment program, explaining how it combined innovative physical therapy with new medical procedures. "Marcus's case is special," he said, "not just because of his physical progress, but because of his extraordinary determination." As the evening went on, Sarah noticed something remarkable. For the first time since she'd known Marcus, people weren't staring at his wheelchair. Instead, they were looking at his smile, at the love between him and his bride, at the triumph of the human spirit over adversity. Late in the evening, Marcus's father raised his glass for a toast. "To Marcus and Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who have shown us all that love doesn't just overcome obstacles, it makes miracles possible." The room raised their glasses in celebration, but Marcus and Sarah hardly noticed. They were lost in each other's eyes, celebrating their own private miracle, the miracle of finding each other, of believing in each other, and of never giving up on love. 1 month after their unforgettable wedding, Sarah and Marcus's story spread far beyond their small community in Atlanta. A guest's video of Marcus standing and dancing with Sarah had gone viral on social media, touching millions of hearts worldwide. But for the newlyweds, life was about much more than their moment of internet fame. Sarah sat on their apartment balcony one sunny morning, watching as Marcus practiced his walking exercises with the walker. They had converted their spare room into a mini therapy space, allowing Marcus to continue his treatments at home. Though he still used his wheelchair most of the time, he made sure to practice standing and walking for short periods each day. "You're getting stronger," Sarah observed, noting how his balance had improved. "Dr. Chen will be impressed at your next appointment." Marcus smiled, carefully lowering himself back into his wheelchair. "It's all thanks to my personal cheerleader," he said, wheeling over to kiss her cheek. "Having you believe in me makes all the difference." Their new life together had fallen into a comfortable rhythm. Sarah continued her work as a physical therapist, now specializing in patients with spinal cord injuries. Her experience with Marcus had given her unique insight into both the physical and emotional challenges her patients faced. Marcus had returned to coaching basketball, but with a new perspective. He started a program for young athletes with disabilities, teaching them to play wheelchair basketball. His story of determination inspired his students, showing them that limitations only existed in the mind. "You should have seen Tommy today," Marcus told Sarah one evening after practice. "He made 10 baskets in a row from his wheelchair. That kid's going to be a star." Their apartment frequently filled with visitors, family, friends, and even some of Marcus's former patients who had become close friends. Everyone noticed how the couple seemed to move in perfect sync, anticipating each other's needs without a word. One evening, as they hosted a dinner party, Marcus surprised everyone by standing up to make a toast. Though he still needed the walker for support, his movements were more confident now. "I want to thank everyone here," he said, looking around the room, "but especially my wife, Sarah. People often ask me about the miracle of learning to stand again, but the real miracle happened long before that. It happened the day Sarah walked into my hospital room and saw past my wheelchair to the man inside." Sarah wiped away tears as their friends applauded. Later that night, as they got ready for bed, she found Marcus looking thoughtfully out their bedroom window. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, wrapping her arms around him from behind. "I was just thinking about our future," he replied, holding her hands. "Dr. Chen says I might never walk without support, and there will always be things I can't do. Does that ever worry you?" Sarah moved to face him, sitting on his lap in the wheelchair, something that had become their special way of having heart-to-heart talks. "Marcus Thompson, let me tell you what I see in our future. I see us growing old together, supporting each other through whatever life brings. I see you continuing to inspire people with your strength and determination. I see us facing every challenge as a team, just like we always have." The next morning, they received an email from a major rehabilitation center. The director had seen their viral wedding video and wanted Marcus to speak to their patients about his journey. There was also interest in studying the experimental treatment program that had helped him regain partial mobility. "Should we do it?" Marcus asked, showing Sarah the email. "Of course," she replied without hesitation. "If our story can give hope to even one person, it's worth sharing." As they prepared for this new chapter in their journey, Sarah and Marcus knew that their wedding day surprise had been more than just a magical moment. It had become a symbol of hope, showing the world that love, determination, and faith could overcome any obstacle. Their story wasn't about a miracle cure or a perfect ending. It was about two people who chose to see the best in each other, who faced life's challenges together, and who proved that true love doesn't require perfect circumstances. It only requires perfect acceptance of each other exactly as they are. The end.